5.1.4. Question is, for which values of x is f of x our parabola? For which values of x is our parabola f of x greater than 0? So the marks are not very high, but these are the questions that require a little bit of analysis of your diagram of your sketch, and this is where a lot of you fall flat, just in terms of not being able to properly interpret what does this mean. Okay, so hopefully in this video I'll be able to further or better explain that. So we're going to answer 5.1.4, for which values of, just go back there, for which values of x is f of x greater than 0. In other words, for which values of x, in other words, values of x on the x-axis, is our parabola greater than 0. So f of x greater than 0. Greater than 0 means we interpret this as positive. So for which values of x is my y values of my parabola positive? That's actually how you should interpret this. When I look at for which values of x is f of x greater than 0, I'm actually asking for which values of x are my y values for my parabola greater than 0. In other words, for which values of x are my y values for my parabola positive. Now let's look quickly at values of x for my parabola where the y values are negative, in other words less than 0. So just as a point of reference, I forgot to label my axes earlier. So the x-axis, when it comes to y values, the x-axis is our point of reference, meaning everything above the x-axis, every y value above the x-axis is positive, right? So in other words, these guys over here, and all the values below the x-axis are negative. In other words, these guys over here, all the way down to negative infinity, and this is all the way up to positive infinity, right? So the values of my parabola, the y values, the f of x values, remember f of x is the y values, okay? They are, so f of x is the corresponding y value for a particular x value. If you think of functions and relationships, if I have some kind of input value x, the f of x is the number that results from the x value, so the dependent variable, okay? If you think back to all those concepts, so f of x is in fact y, right? So that is what we need to remember here. So if I look at the part of the parabola that is negative, in other words below the x-axis, it would be this part over here, right? All of this, if I color this in, it would be the piece of the parabola that is below the x-axis. That would be the part of my parabola where f of x is less than 0. What I mean by f of x, meaning all the corresponding y values that would hit my parabola for every corresponding x value. In other words, if I choose an x value over here, if I drop that down, that will hit my parabola. So it's going to be, even though there's a 2-mark question, this will probably be a bit of a lengthy video. So hopefully just to drive this point home. So every point over here, right, I'm obviously just choosing a couple of discrete points, but if you look at the region of my parabola that lies between -3 and +3, meaning this here, that's the part of my parabola that is less than 0. In other words, for that part, f of x will be less than 0, negative, right? So if I choose -2, for example, x -2, so if I draw a vertical line down, as soon as I hit my parabola, the corresponding y value here would be a negative value. If I choose anything here, corresponding y value will be negative. Everything here will have x values lying between -3 and 3. So even on this side, if I choose, let's say 1 is over here, x equals 1, my corresponding y value will be this one over here, negative. In other words, in fact, they are symmetrical, of course, about the y-axis. So all the values here, for the corresponding y values for these x values on this side of the parabola will be equal to the corresponding y values, will be equal to the y values of the corresponding x values on this side of the parabola. Right, so if we understand that this part of the parabola is below the x-axis and it's negative, the part that is above the x-axis, meaning this part of the arm over here and that part of the arm over there, those parts are positive. It's above the x-axis, so we need the corresponding x values that correspond to these positive y values, right? So that will be all these guys over here, up to this point 3, where our y values are 0, right? At -3, the y values are 0. So we know that as soon as we go to the left of -3, we'll be hitting those parts of the parabola. And this, of course, goes all the way to -infinity. And those are the parts where my parabola is positive. And then from +3 over here, all these x values will hit some kind of corresponding positive y value. So going all the way that way, my parabola is positive, greater than 0. So the question is, for which values of x is my parabola positive? We know it's all the x values to the right of +3 and all the x values to the left of -3, not including -3 and 3, because there is not an equal sign here. It's just greater than. Remember, we follow whatever they give us. So they want f of x greater than 0 only, not greater than or equal to 0, just greater than 0. Our answer must also reflect that. So our answer will also only have a great or one inequality sign, not including the equal sign over there. So I know that looking at what we discussed now, my positive x values corresponding to positive y values are all of these guys over here and all of these guys to this side. And that means all x values less than -3 and all x values greater than +3. So now I need to know, how do I write this? So I'm going to say x less than -3 or x greater than +3. This notation, you'll see that it's split. I said either this or that. There's a break in between. So it's not one continuous inequality, meaning it is not like if I had to describe for which values is my parabola or f of x less than 0, in other words, where it's negative, that portion of the graph lies clearly between two values. In other words, it would be this region of x values over here. In that case, I could have written x greater than -3. In other words, going that way, but only all the way up to 3. So less than negative or less than +3. So I could say less than 3. In other words, this portion, continuous portion between two values, corresponds to how I write it here. If you can see that here, I'm one continuous set of x values between -3 and 3. So my x is written between -3 and 3. But here for my positive x values, there's a break. That same set of x values that we used here is now the gap between this part of the graph where my x values corresponds to positive y values, and here where my x values corresponds to the other set of y values that's positive. It does not follow all the way through, because in this portion here, my f of x is negative. So there's positive values all the way from here up to this point. Then there's a gap, and then there is this part over here. So you can think of that gap, if you look at it from the graph, and relate it to this gap between what I've written here. In other words, x less than -3 going that way, and x greater than 3 going that way. So I hope that explanation did not make things more complicated. It's really just about trying to understand that my f of x, when I talk about f of x, I mean y values. F of x means y values. So if I ask for which x values are my f of x values positive, I mean where is my graph, my function. F of x is also the function, the y values is the function. Where is that function positive?